mysterious circumstances. Somebody please check Tony's alibi.
Ouch.
Mustaches. So like I tried the mustache. So the military, army, like you said, like this.
Huh?
It's like this way.
Yeah.
So I tried it.
Oh.
I look horrible. I look like I got some kids in my closet. It was yeah, it's only certain few, man. It does not work for me at all.
All right. Back on track. It's good to know. We talked about the synchronizer, which keeps propellers at the same RPM. Now we can add to it the syncophaser. It uses phasers. That's lasers. Synchophasing not only keeps it at the same RPM, but will set the phase angle. So what kind of plane is this we're looking at?
Skymaster.
That's Skymaster. I can't figure out if we're looking at the back of it or the front of it with that funky cowl right there, but I think
Well, that's the front because the back, the prop is higher in the back.
Yeah.
How do you sync one propeller?
Well, I'm going to talk about that. This is a twin-engine aircraft.
Front push-pull.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was bringing up, the fact that it was a Skymaster. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have the front engine and the rear engine back here. So if they are in phase, then the props would be locked and going around to get like the first picture I showed you. I'll go back to that one because you don't remember. And let me see. Now, if you want them 20 degrees out of phase, you see one is a little bit ahead, the other, and then there's 48, which is oddly specific, but there you go, 48. And we started with the picture. This isn't moving fast enough for me. Of this airplane, which, talking to you, are probably have the syncophaser. They are in phase. So you notice that they're both, well, nearly in phase. Nearly in phase. So, synchophasers. So I shall write things for you. Propeller, syncophaser. Synchrophaser. It incorporates the features of a synchronizer but adds propeller phase adjustment. So it incorporates, not off to a good start, the features of a synchronizer but adds propeller phase adjustment, but adds prop phase. Do you have this on the C-130s? Sweet. Why aren't you up here talking about this stuff?
I told you that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, I'm on P3s. We have them on.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense, yeah. You guys ever going to use those for fighting fires? Are they using them yet? Have they ever?
We're trying to get our.
God, that's got to be so expensive to keep up.
I guess so.
Just paying people to work on them.
I mean, we're trying to keep this, get our.
You have U.S. Forest Service?
Yeah.
Because you had to get both, huh? Cal Fire and Forest Service.
So our federal contract is pretty much what we need to get, and they knocked us last year.
They knocked you?
So like they didn't give it to us last year because there was a lot of stuff that we needed to fix. We had to replace all the hoses on all of it.
Oof.
So,
Why would you change a hose? What could possibly go wrong with a hose? Would you like to share what could possibly go wrong with a hose?
I rotted the hose and it.
Yeah, that's what the fire was.
Fuel spewing.
The
The vapor return.
fire.
Yeah, you don't want your firefighting plane be a flying ball. of
yeah.
fire.
So the 310, you guys know, we had a little bit of fire.
The vapor return.
And at this point, I'm theorizing, thanks to your help, that it was the vapor return line. Cracked. It was spraying fuel.
Ooh.
And then
And
with
the
wires
exhaust is
rubbing on
right
stuff.
over it. It's about that far away, right?
Yeah.
That's great
So I
design.
had it spraying right
And it was
next to
spraying up.
It was hitting the cowling, back down on it. Yep.
Phasing is the relative position of the prop blades. What?
Did a good investigation.
Yeah, like CSI and stuff. The phaser sets the number of degrees, sets the number of degrees of the secondary engine, slave engine, past the master, past the primary. All right, so it uses, well, at least out of this book, it uses a pulse generator. Uses a pulse generator. It is keyed to the same blade on each engine. So like the number one blade, keyed to the same blade on each engine. And I believe that the reason why it's got to be the same blade, and blades are actually numbered, like 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you'd want to use the same blade because especially on a turbine it wouldn't matter, I don't think, but on a piston engine it would absolutely matter because you would want it to be in the same position. That's what you're phasing it like. So the number one is on top dead center and the number one's on top dead center. Not that you're like number one top dead center on this side, but number 3 on this side. I think that would defeat the whole purpose because then you couldn't line up your phase. You'd always be off on the engine, which could cause a vibration problem. But you're trying to get rid of it, so then you would key it to the same one. So what is a pulse generator? I don't honestly know what a pulse generator is. Probably that's an old-timey thing that would sense an air pulse potentially. I think nowadays, like Sherman was talking about, you definitely want to use an optic sensor with an indicator on the blade you're looking at, which would make far more sense. Is that what you guys have? Is it optic? Or magnetic? Magnetic pickup.
on the back of the prop.
Yep, or a magnetic pickup would make way more sense. Pulse generator. Or whatever item you're using. We'll give RPM information. We'll give RPM info as well as position info. As well as position. Obviously, if the pulses are at the same time, the blades would then be in sync, and if the pulses are not, then they're out of sync. Maybe you want it out of sync. You can move them. Like, I almost feel like that's why they use the picture of the Skymaster, because it would seem like, and I don't know this for a fact, you'd want, in a multi-engine situation where they're on the wings, you would want them in the same phase. Is that?
Well, I know that you don't want the tips to like cross at the same time, right?
Is that it? You don't want them hitting the cabin at the same time? Because I've
Oh,
heard that.
Well, I mean, we have a 4-engine plane, and
Oh yeah, you don't want them doing
Certain
this, right?
right,
So you want them this way.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The tips were not.
Okay.
Because that just creates more noise and vibration.
That would make sense because the coming across each other like that.
Yeah.
But then I think about the Skymaster. I wonder about how that, with one engine right behind the other, do you want the pulses to miss the one behind you?
Yeah.
The next one would make sense. But then you start thinking about, okay, take it a next step further and counter-rotating props, which is something we didn't even talk about. But that's certainly in Marines, boats, that's like all the rage. It's not that common in aircraft. Who had it? It was.
like the blades on the
Yeah, they'll have one blade right behind the other.
Oh yeah.
One turns right, one turns left. I can't-
Inline counter rotating, yeah.
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 I don't know of any modern plane that does that.
There's Russian helicopters that use
Don't
that.
they need Russian nuclear to use them?
What?
The
There's some
TU like
nukes.
9. You know
So-
the
A lot
Oh,
of
the
Russian
Russian
bombers.
bomber,
Yeah.
Bear.
Yeah. The
Oh,
big-
that's right, the Bear. And then there was, God, there was a plane at Reno that used to have that. I forget. I wouldn't even know.
The Wyvern is
Wyvern's
British,
World War II,
yeah.
British, yeah.
Anyway, but my point was, then you think about that. Well, there is no phasing on that. You know, it's like, but that's one pulse hitting another pulse, and you know, and certainly, like I said, in marine engines, that's the big deal, right? Who's the boating enthusiast here? Yeah, your Bravo 3 Mercs.
Yeah,
That's
I think so, right?
Yeah, I like those. Yeah. But anyway, what if the pulses? Oh, I don't want to, pulses. Let's see. I'll write this. Otherwise, who knows? Something happens. Like, well, you never said that. Pulses are at the same time. Blades are in sync. Sounds like a name of a boy band. In both RPM and phase. If pulses are at the same frequency, but different times, what does that mean?
They're same RPM but different phase.
Good. Different times, then RPM. Then RPM is in sync, and blades are out of phase.
My blushing.
I don't think there's any Q&A questions on this. I don't think it comes up necessarily, but it's nice to know what this kind of stuff is. How do you think it works?
What?
How do you get them in phase, out of phase? You know, and think about it. You know, we started with a picture of the Cessna Skymasters, a 1960s version aircraft. So it's all analog stuff for the most part. How do you suppose just
Speed or spring tension.
speed or spring tension?
One.
So how do you bring them in phase and out of phase?
Changing the RPM with the speed or spring tension.
What's that?
Changing the RPM with the speed or spring tension.
That would just sound so simple.
Magneto laser ignition.
Yeah. But that's all you've got is a speed or spring input. So all you can do is you speed up one engine until it's where you want it, and then back it off and get it there, and then you just lock it in. It's just, that's all it would be.
Really?
Yeah.
I was smart. It is that simple.
Because we're not talking about engines that have electronic ignition or electronic FADAC control or anything.
Or computers.
Or, no computers. It's all analog. So you know what a continental fuel injection system is. That's what this aircraft has. So if you want the props to be in phase, you can control the fuel control unit, the governor, and turn magnetos on and off. Which one are you going to choose to do? You know, so it's all you got left is the governor. You know, what input does the governor have other than the speeder spring? So it's got to be that way. If one is spinning a little bit faster, we've already discussed that, then the control module will just adjust the speeder spring tension until they're both spinning at the same RPM. And then if you want a different phase, well, then you would just slow one down or speed it up until it got to the right phase, then back it off until it stayed within phase of it. Doesn't have to be difficult.
Just that simple.
So it's helpful if you remember, all of this stuff was invented before the computer. I mean, your world is so different than my world.
Goddamn smart people.
You don't know a world without computers, probably, right?
Nope, I do.
Well, I'm looking at
Oh.
these two.
Uh,
When my first airplane job, I remember working there for a couple years when we got a computer.
I was in 5th grade going TAing in my 1st grade class, so like really not like 4 years after, and they were already having iPads just in the classroom.
When I was in the Navy, I remember when we had a computer on the ship down in engineering. And it was just, I guess, DOS programming with the monochrome, had the green letters. And I don't even know, we could sneak in there, and I think there was some sort of little game we could play on there if nobody was walking, midnight watch.
Solitaire.
That's
Oregon Trail.
then you slowly learn things like don't look up scat tube or studs, stuff
Don't
like-
do it.
No. Control unit will. I'm never gonna do this. Will adjust. Oh, so my point was, these aircraft don't have computers, so as needed. Isn't there some thing out there about how the phone in your pocket has like X number times more computing power than the Apollo?
Yeah.
The first a wristwatch has more computing power than the computers that
Well, you can't say that because you have an analog wristwatch, don't you, Aslong? Yeah, there's no computer chips.
the digital watch. Classy man.
I know. He inspired me to wear my analog the other day. He didn't notice though. As needed. Let's see, as needed to keep the engine in sync. To keep the engine in sync. S, Y, and C. And on RPM. F. The cockpit control. Control allows the pilot to vary the phase angle to reduce cabin noise and vibration.
And that's all that it does, is just reduce vibration by offsetting the
Yep. That's all it can do. Auto feather. Auto feather. Well, it's what the name implies. When would you want auto feather?
Engine
Your
failure.
engine dies.
All right, so typically used for takeoff and landing. Why? Because if you lose an engine on takeoff and landing, you already have a high workload, and the ability to identify and put away the right engine on takeoff seems like an awful lot of pilot workload. So if you had an auto feather system, it will automatically feather the engine that has failed. So when armed, system is activated. Activated with power levers. With power levers above 50%. So you arm it, you got to bring it above 50%. Otherwise, if you were idling and you armed it, they would feather. And they'd be like, well, damn it, did not want that to happen. Then you'd look like a fool. So causes.
So this is basically just used as like a secondary thing to lessen the workload as you're taking off.
That's what I would say. Safety measure. It'll automatically feather the prop if you should lose that engine. Mind, we're talking multi-engine aircraft here, not a single engine. It causes the prop to feather. If torque pressure switch senses a drop below a preset limit. So if we're talking about power levers and torque sensors, what kind of engine are we talking about? Yep, turbine engines. Pressure switch senses a drop below a preset limit. And you would want to add a time delay in case you just had a burp or a fart in the engine and you don't want to auto feather, and then it gets better. So we'll delay. Time delay, whoops, will prevent is the word I wanted. Will prevent a feather if there is just a momentary loss of power. Feather if there is just a momentary 1 or 2 seconds loss of power. And thankfully, if one prop feathers, in other words, you've had a shutdown, auto feather, system will not auto feather the second engine. And that could actually change if you have 4 engines, 3. They kind of twin, that's the way it would go. Did you have that too?
No, on the king area,
Okay.
not on the CO3.
You have king air time too?
No.
He's so cool.
I know. Just back there all.
Why are you in this spot?
That's what I wondered.
Because I don't know
Teach
s-
Ted.
Are you
about the
s-
systems
Are you
and
spying on me?
He's from the
He's
FAA.
from the FAA.
Because
That's
I'm
right.
just a dumb pilot.
No. I've met dumb pilots. So
Can you explain
I-
point that one pointing more?
if one okay, so you got a twin engine
The ground
aircraft
is very close to you.
and you got auto feather and you have a momentary loss of power, right? 1 or 2 seconds, it won't feather, but let's say 3-4 seconds, it's going to auto feather that engine. Okay. Now let's say you start having trouble with this one. Maybe it's kind of coming and going. The last thing you want is for the auto feather to feather that one too,
Why not? If
because then you got nothing. I would,
then you,
It's better to
but
have a
then
little bit.
you would have, like if that one fails too, then you have drag just on one.
but if it's still running a little bit,
a little bit.
that would be fantastic. And then maybe you have, not maybe, but as a pilot, you have the option to turn that one back on. Okay, so maybe it auto feathered because I lost the preset limit. Maybe it's set at, do you know, say it's less than 75% power and it's supposed to auto feather. You're like, well, shoot, that one's at less than 70. Okay, I'll bring them both back and get 75% power. Where this, I could see a scenario like this, for those of you guys who listen to the podcast, and there I was, they talk about a citation, which doesn't have propellers, but it has turbine engines in it, so could have just easily been a King Air. And they took off and were flying, they were medical transport,
Was the fuel one?
the fuel
Yeah.
one, and they were flying and they lost an engine. Right? So if it was like a King Air, okay, that would have auto feathered for them, which they're in the air. They could have done themselves, but whatever, they feather. And then they start losing this engine. It's diminishing. Well, you wouldn't want that to auto feather. You'd want that one to go. In fact, at that point, I'd be trying this one again, maybe. I don't know, but they didn't. They lost one. It was dead. And the other one started dying and then died.
Or they
But at
brought
least
it started to go. They pulled it back and put it back in to try to bring it down and back up. But
Yeah.
it just kept going after you shoved it back, the power back in.
Yeah,
It just
so
kept
you could
dropping.
see how you want the choice, but on takeoff, something happens very quickly. That feathers, you can manage it real quick. Got it?
God.
Turns out they landed did a dead stick landing. The people in the back didn't even know it. They told the people in the back we're diverting because we've lost an engine. Don't worry about it. Citations. The engines are, almost centerline thrust. They fly apparently very well on single engine. No big deal. Hey, this is an inconvenience, not an emergency. And then but being the smart pilots that they were, they diverted to an airport because you just can't keep flying on a single engine. And on the way to this airport to divert, that one shut down. So now they're dead stick coming in. They do this beautiful landing. They didn't even tell the people in the back that they lost both engines. They stop on the runway. Pilot gets, and they're like, well, why are we stopped on the runway? It's like, we actually lost both engines. Like, man, that was actually your best landing you've ever had. And he's like, thanks. So they're trying to troubleshoot this thing, and they're talking to the home base, and the home base says, hey, hang on a second. They got back and said, we have another one of our airplanes in the air that just lost an engine. They said, declare an emergency, land immediately. And they did. And what happened is at the airport, somebody, there's PRIST. You guys know about PRIST?
It was DEF, wasn't it?
Well, first you have to PRIST. Why would you do this? So there's PRIST. This is something. It's a anti-microorganism stuff that you put in jet fuel to keep it from. Which is funny. Organisms grow in fuel, but they do.
From like algae.
Algae and stuff like that.
Also, it's just like so it happens, but it's just like it does in like diesel trucks.
At least according to
Okay,
the
anyway,
they're
go ahead.
anti-ice
Sorry.
thing.
Huh?
The anti-ice thing.
And crystals, ice crystals and stuff. Okay, somebody put DEF into the fuel.
Oh.
When you mix DEF, they thought it was PRIST. They mixed DEF. When DEF goes into the nozzles, it solidifies apparently.
Crystallized.
Crystallized it. So crystallized, shut down the nozzle. Here's the crazy part of it all. They totaled the aircraft. The cost to remove the engine and go in and remove the nozzle and put a new nozzle in wasn't worth the cost of the Citation jet. That's how expensive these jets are. It's like, just throw away the airframe, Like, damn. Put a couple Continental O200s on it. Let's go.
Actually, I think the CJs have an issue with icing, the CJ2 specifically. So they actually require PRIST.
All right. So, well, if you listen to, like here especially, because it's the CTAF frequency, the Common Traffic Advisory frequency, is also the Unicom where you can call and order your fuel. You will hear, because we have so many turbine engines operating off of here, you'll hear them call all the time to Jet Services. Hey, Jet Services, November, whatever, coming in. We were going to top off, 250 gallons, whatever, and they always say PRIST or no PRIST at the end of the statement. No PRIST, PRIST. So, prop ice. You're going to get a lot more prop or ice information in second year because this really has a lot more to do with anti-ice systems. But at least when you get there, you'll be like, oh wait, I think I've heard about this before. And while we're on that subject, if you guys could just do me a favor and at least not constantly say, Kevin never told me about that, because they know exactly what I'm teaching. And every time you say that,
Hey, Kevin.
the other teachers come in here. One time, this happened to somebody in here. Larry was giving an oral on a Saturday, and a student said, well, Kevin never taught us about that. Hang on. He takes out his phone, calls me at home, puts it on speakerphone. Hey, Kevin, yeah, I'm sitting here with one of your students who's telling me that you have never told them about such and such.
To which you reply.
Oh, yeah, actually, if you like, I can tell you the date and time that I said that, because my notes are usually labeled with what date and time I say stuff. So, and it's recorded now, so.
You got the receipts.
Yeah.
Receipts.
So, don't try and blame it on me. It just gets worse for you. Best bet is say something like, I had diarrhea that day and I had to run to the bathroom. Yeah. Go for the sympathy thing. Huh?
Potty break.
Yeah. All right, it's almost potty break. All right, prop ice. Accumulation. Okay, why is ice such a big deal on props? So.
Change the airfoil.
Okay, I'm hearing change the airfoil. Balance. Airfoil is obvious, but accumulation of ice causes loss of airfoil. Loss of airfoil. Shape. We're talking specifically props here, and prop imbalance.
If you get a little bit of ice on one side, just get a little ice on the
Yeah.
other side.
It usually ices evenly, so icing, not the kind you put on a cake. Does not usually occur near the outer section of the prop. Near the outer section of the prop. Mostly because the prop is spinning so much faster, it's hitting the air at a higher speed, which causes heat, and so the blades are actually, they warm up to the point where ice won't accumulate. So if you ever want to do it when a plane just shuts down, run up and touch the blade, and you'll see how it's much cooler and it gets hotter. I'm so full of crap. You guys will buy anything, won't you? Don't write that down. It won't accumulate. It doesn't accumulate so much on the outboard section because why?
It spins faster.
It spins too fast. Doesn't stick to it. It flings it off, like the paint.
Just like
Like
yeah,
that.
just like
That's why you're up there feeling for that heat difference. You can also feel to see how much paint slipping off.
Yeah. We got two types of icing systems, or icing systems isn't the word I should use.
De-ice or anti-ice?
Well, I don't want to say that because that's what of no ice,
Nice.
no ice systems. All right, so that's not a proper term right there because there's anti-ice. So I couldn't say there's two types of anti-ice systems because one type of get rid of the ice system or no ice systems is anti-ice, and the other one is de-ice. I know. De-ice? De-ice? All right, so anti-ice prevents accumulation of ice, and de-ice removes ice. Built up. You had, do you have any experience with the boots, inflatable boots?
The King Air had,
So what is the procedure?
the procedure is to let it accumulate a little bit and then actuate the boots. But if you don't have enough, then it would just typically
Bridge.
create like a dome of
Yeah.
ice in front, and then the boots do nothing. So it has to be
That's-
enough for it to break off.
Okay, and that's what I've heard my whole life, except recently, listening to the podcast, people talk about, well, if you think you're going to encounter ice, turn the boots on. I'm like, they say not to do that. So what he's talking about is, like the King Air has a leading edge. All you see is a piece of rubber. It's all you'll see. But in flight, it has sections that go all the way down the wing. It doesn't do it all at once. Or some do. They'll like these two, then these two. But it'll inflate like a little ridge. So,
Oh, a little bubble.
so like here's the leading edge. Well, it'll
That's
inflate
on-
like
that's on
that
the wing.
and like that. Yeah, you're looking at the leading edge of the wing. Those two things will inflate, or sometimes more. I've seen them where they do. Well, there's more of them, but sometimes they go in sequence. Like this one and this one will be phase one. That'll be phase two. And so that's why I asked Tony, because I was always told that you want to wait on this system for some ice to build up, and then you would inflate the boot. And when you inflate the boot, it cracks and blows the ice off.
Yep.
Okay, if you weren't careful, red will have to be, blue can be the ice, blue. Then what happens is if you do it premature, the ice will build up like this, and those little boots can inflate and deflate all you want, and all they're going to do is inflate in the cavity they've created. And then the ice just keeps building up and building up, and you can't get rid of it. And so, huh? Well, we can talk about that. That's where I'm going with all this. So these are inflated on a piston engine aircraft. Use the vacuum pump, because the vacuum pump sucks and blows. So you use the sucky side, is always on, and it sucks them down against the wing. And then when you want to inflate them, it would use the blow side to blow them, and then But obviously in a king air, you can use bleed air for that. So that would be, is this anti or deice?
Yes.
All right. So, all right. So anti-ice, deice, so D. We'll talk about, so now you understand that. So anti-ice. Anti-ice. There's several ways we can do anti-ice. We can do anti-ice fluid, like the that's exactly where I was looking for, but the plane, the cirrus. Thank you. The cirrus has millions and billions of little holes. You can't even see them. They're so fine, but you'll see that it's a bare metal. It's like, why is this not painted, this area? And they're laser drilled holes in there, and you have this fluid that will come up and seep out and roll down the wing, and it keeps ice from building up. So that particular system, it's anti, meaning prevent it from happening, turn it on when you're going into an icing situation. So there's different kinds. There's isopropyl alcohol. Oops, ALC. Alcohol. Downside is flammability. Yeah, wait a minute. You start a fire. Should work even better, wouldn't it? Phosphate compounds.
It's a bad thing and good thing.
Pros and cons.
Dude, we just got the ice now.
Is that TKS, right? TKS is the common name. Downside is cost. I don't know how much it costs. Downside is cost. I don't know of anything using the alcohol system. Everything I know is the TKS.
The CJs use alcohol at least for the windshields, de-icing the or anti-icing the windshields.
Oh, I don't think anything uses TKS for the windshield.
Sorry, alcohol.
Yeah, I don't think anything uses TKS for a windshield.
Oh.
Because if you ever seen it, it's like what happened.
I know
Is that true? So I don't think you can, because I think it leaves a smeared film. Like antifreeze gets on your window, you can't. Yeah, you don't want that on your windshield. So.
I know I think it's the original CJ series had TKS on the wings, but the issue was they leak.
So anti-ice. So anti-ice. A and T ice. Anti-ice must be used or should be used before the formation of ice. So anti-ice does not melt ice per se. Kind of. All right, so how does this anti-ice work? And we're talking about propellers, remember? So operation. A tank that stores the fluid. So now we have a problem of how much fluid do you have? And there is, oh good, it says that, a switch or a rheostat. Well, switch should be on off, a rheostat would be high, medium, low, and you can adjust it, which is, I know how the cirruses are. So you would adjust how much fluid you want to go depending on the icing severity that you're dealing with. Obviously, the slower the switch is going, the longer your tank is going to last, the further you can go. So you have to kind of think that through. All right, so tank goes through a filter, through a pump, because it says that. Feed pipe goes into a slinger ring, which is really just open to the atmosphere. So a little drop goes into here, which of course you have to remember this is 2D you're looking at, but it goes all around like a frisbee, right? So it goes in the little frisbee, And then centrifugal force holds it inside there, and it rolls around until it finds its way into the little pipe, goes through the pipe, and then it comes up to, Andrea,
It's the
come on, spotlight's on you.
rubber feed shoes.
Rubber feed shoes. So there are rubber boots here. The rubber boots have grooves in them. That's all they have. It's a boot with some grooves. The grooves direct the fluid to the right spot so that it goes out on the prop. Otherwise, it would just kind of groovy boots. Oh, look at that, calls it an overshoe.
I thought it was funny because we like informally call them boots, but they're really called just shoes.
Shoes.
It's like,
Boots and
what's the
shoes.
difference?
Oh, there we go.
Change it.
Propeller, a feed shoe. There we go. There's your feed shoe.
Oh.
There's a little pipe that comes up, goes onto the rubber boot. The rubber boot does what?
Groove.
Has grooves and directs the fluid.
Groovy.
All right, we're not talking about that yet.
Something else for a
Huh? And that right there is a really fancy rug. So you might have that. Operation, a tank that stores fluid. Is plumbed to a slinger. To a slinger ring at the prop. 2, the slinger ring collects the fluid and through centrifugal force sprays the fluid onto the base of the blades. Onto the base of the blade. Want me to finish this point? You want to go on break? All right, yeah, I want to finish. So a pilot control the rheostat will vary. The amount of fluid will vary. Oops, I'm out of room. The amount of fluid release to meet icing conditions. I have 2 more points and we'll be done. I'll let you catch up. Know too that your aircraft has to be certified to go into known icing conditions. You can't just fly an aircraft into icing and yeah, because a lot of airplanes aren't equipped with anything. In fact, one of the podcasts I was listening to, a guy was joking around. He actually put on his instrument panel, "This aircraft is approved to fly out of known icing conditions." Yeah. Icing's a big deal. It's one of the things, it scares me. In fact, talking to Steve, you guys, Steve, and his dad, they went flying Monday or Tuesday. We're flying in the Bonanza at 3,000 feet, picking up ice right through here. So yeah, they were icing up pretty good and had to put it down.
Okay, so when you
Yeah.
went to like Boston, you had to make sure you check the weather.
Oh, yeah. So staying out of any visible moisture. And yeah, after we left Pennsylvania, I was terrified, man. I was staring at the outside. I'm like, if we get ice, but we were above icing for a very long time. It was snowing below us, and it was relatively sunny, but it was closing in.
Maybe you should go to a doctor.
I did. They sent me away.
They're like, you're too much.
This is pretty far. Take ibuprofen.
It's not bad.
Yeah, no, they heard one click. It was like, oh yeah, we can't do anything. I was like,
4, a check valve.
thanks for fucking them up.
A check valve that operates at 3 to 5 psi. Prevents fluid from being sucked out of the tank. Which is to say, backwards. In the system, you want to put a check valve, probably what that is. And the check valve allows fluid to go that way, but it is spring loaded. So we can put a ball right there with the spring. And that way, the low pressure that is right here does not draw it out. So you have to have the pump running to displace the ball with the spring to actually have pressure to open it up to go. Otherwise, this low pressure back here behind the prop is just going to drain it out. And that's not good. Not at 3 to 5 psi. Just put a heavier spring. So let's see. I think I've never seen one without, but I'll put some props. Use feed shoes. So feed shoes, they are rubber boots. Rubber boots with channels. Channels that direct fluid. Direct fluid down the blade. And feed shoes only cover about 1/3 of the blade. I think a lot of that probably has, well, it's not needed, but I think the blades become horribly inefficient if you start running your boots all the way down the blades.